I had never protested before. Not officially, anyway. I once boycotted Starbucks on my own for 5 years because they wouldn't let me eat a Subway sandwich at their table, even though I'd bought a cup of their coffee, but that was petty and probably just an excuse to not pay $6 for coffee. I was raised in a conservative household, and while I don't remember any conversation about protesters, I guess it just sort of seeped into my thought process that they were a particularly angry sort of folk, either shaking their fists and railing against law and order, or at best, raising valid points in some of the most ridiculous ways possible. In 2003, I saw a war protest in New York City and thought it was the most useless waste of time I had ever seen. What I'm saying is, if you don't get it, I get it. But then the financial crisis hit in 2008, and I saw people with the same concerns I had about money and politics march together to voice those concerns. I also saw the police deal with them harshly, and I watched nothing change. I walked the streets of Ferguson in 2014 and helped clean up the aftermath when militarized police kettled, tear-gassed, and arrested peaceful protesters and members of the media, escalating what had been a peaceful protest into a riot. I didn't agree with the protesters on every point, but I did begin to realize there are more sides to these stories than I had previously believed. That's on me for not realizing sooner. I've done some work with refugees in the last couple of years. I've learned what our vetting process is. It's an intricate process involving every branch of U.S. intelligence and employing biodata, such as iris scans. It also includes extensive background checks. It takes an average of 2 years, and fewer than 1% of applicants make it past step 3. I could really get bogged down here, but the information is easy to find, either on the archived White House page or with International Rescue Committee. We already have extreme vetting, but then politicians announce things like,
the federal government doesn't have either the capacity or the will to keep Americans safe in the refugee system.
They could be ISIS. I don't know.
These refugees are 80% women, children, and elderly, and a common theme in conversation with them is that they didn't want to leave their homes in the first place. This is preservation, not wanderlust or opportunism. So when I heard that the executive order was putting a 90-day halt on all refugees and the usual excuses were being given, I knew this wasn't a vacation cancellation. This was an abrupt stop to a years-long hope. Then I heard that not only were 50 people being held at DFW airport, but that some of them had valid green cards and visas and were still being detained. I had a decision to make. I could stay at home and channel my now familiar hopeless feeling into another social media post, or I could do, I don't know, something. I thought of the refugee families I'd worked with, how once when I brought them a meal, even though they spoke no English, they insisted on giving me and my children Diet Cokes in return. I wanted them and these 50 people who were now being detained to know that they were welcome. So I wrote a quick blog entry asking for help, and I went to go write them letters. I thought I might be the only one there when I showed up, but I was not.
Set them free! Set them free! Set them free! Set them free! Build bridges, not walls! Build bridges, not walls! Build bridges, not walls! Build bridges, not walls! Build bridges, not walls!
Perhaps it was because it was unexpected, or maybe it was because it was the first hopeful thing I'd seen in a while. I can't fully articulate why, but when I walked in and saw My Texas raising their voice together in support of those least able to help themselves, I cried. I hope they can hear this in the room where they're being kept, I thought. I hope they can hear this in the courtrooms, in the White House. I hope they can hear this as they scoop up their children and board a boat that they know they might not survive to come to a country whose leader just told them they're not welcome. I hope God can hear this, I thought. I'm not a yeller by nature. At concerts, I'm the guy that stands near the soundboard and nods my approval. At sporting events, my go-to response for a big play is the silent fist pump. When I'm angry, I fall more into a simmer than a boil. But these protesters, they weren't angry, at least not the way young me would have expected. They were kind, welcoming, giving hugs, smiling. They brought water and snacks, and as the room filled to beyond capacity, they created space for the children and the elderly. They looked out for each other. It wasn't long before I caught myself joining in. I saw people of every age, race, and religion. I saw people who looked and believed like me and people who didn't. We weren't required to agree on everything because for this moment in time, we agreed on this. We were taking care of each other. And for perhaps the first time, or at least the first time in a while, I realized that's America. And suddenly I understood the point of protests. It's not to shout down people we simply disagree with. It's not about torches and pitchforks. It's not about following trends. It's solidarity. It's already easy to feel alone in the world, even if you live where you grew up. Coming together to stand up for people is a message. You're not alone. We're all here for you. And that message is not only to the detained or the marginalized or the frightened, it's also to each other. It's a stitching together of a quilt of races and beliefs and ages, standing next to each other saying, I believe in you, I'm here for you, and I believe you'll be here for me. Do protests get it wrong sometimes? Absolutely. Humans get everything wrong, a lot. But when nothing is perfect, that means it's okay to invest in what is good.
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
I've had people ask me this week why I chose this march. Why hadn't I chosen to march for people who are suffering and already here? And what about Christians who are oppressed in the Middle East? What about veterans, the homeless? As if my involvement here was invalid because I hadn't marched for a cause they deemed to be more important. If I close my eyes and turn my head just right, I hear a voice that sounds a lot like my own from 2003. But here's the thing, I love it. See, this cause has become personal to me. I've seen the affected firsthand. I've crossed the Rubicon and I can't ignore it anymore. But those causes, they're all worthy of your effort too. Don't use them as a way to shame us both back to our couches for another round of Netflix and Facebook snark. Get up. The cause I care so deeply about is inextricably tied to the cause you care about. I need you to pull that rope while I'm pulling this one. Let's see what we can build together.